My name is Ethan Mercer, and the night I caught my neighbor stealing electricity from my private solar grid, I learned something that every engineer eventually learns the hard way. The most unpredictable variable in any system is a human being who thinks the rules don't apply to them. At 2:07 in the morning, a security alert exploded from my phone and yanked me out of a dead sleep. At first I thought a raccoon had gotten into one of the equipment sheds again, but when I opened the monitoring app connected to my solar array, I saw a power draw that made absolutely no sense. The system was pulling energy at a rate that shouldn't have been happening in the middle of the night. Half awake and irritated, I threw on a hoodie, grabbed a flashlight, and headed outside. The second I rounded the corner of my workshop, I stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting beside my charging station was a silver Lucid Air with a charging cable plugged directly into my system. Standing next to it like she owned the entire neighborhood was Denise Holloway. Now, before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand who Denise was. Every neighborhood has that one person who volunteers for a tiny amount of authority and somehow transforms into a full-time dictator. Denise was that person. Officially, she was the HOA treasurer. Unofficially, she behaved like she was the president, governor, judge, and police chief of our subdivision. She carried a clipboard everywhere. She sent emails longer than some college essays. She once fined a retired teacher because her mailbox was painted what Denise described as an unauthorized variation of cream. Nobody knew what that meant, including the teacher. The woman spent more time enforcing imaginary rules than most people spent raising their children. My problems with Denise started 2 years earlier when I began building the off-grid solar system I dreamed about for years. I'm an electrical systems engineer by trade, and after decades of dealing with power infrastructure, outages, utility costs, and all the headaches that came with them, I wanted complete energy independence. Not because I was some survivalist preparing for the apocalypse, but because I liked building things. I liked solving problems. I liked knowing exactly how a system worked because I had designed every piece of it myself. For nearly 2 years, every spare weekend went into that project. I installed 48 solar panels, designed custom battery storage, programmed monitoring software, built protection circuits, and created a system capable of running my entire property without touching the public grid. By the time I finished, I had invested over $30,000 and more hours than I could count. But standing there on that final evening, watching the batteries charge under the setting sun for the first time, it felt worth every second. It wasn't just a power system. It was something I had created from the ground up. Denise hated it immediately. The first week after installation, she appeared in my driveway carrying her famous clipboard and wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. She informed me she'd received complaints about visual inconsistency within the neighborhood. When I asked who complained, she gave me her favorite answer: residents. When I asked which residents, she said she couldn't reveal her sources. Funny thing was, there were no sources. There never were. Denise was the source. I showed her city permits. I showed her engineering approvals. I showed her every document proving the installation was completely legal. She stared at the paperwork, smiled tightly, and said something I'll never forget. Just because something is legal doesn't mean it's good for the community. Looking back, that sentence explained everything about Denise. She didn't care about laws. She cared about control. And my solar system represented something she couldn't control. For several months things remained relatively quiet. Denise continued terrorizing the neighborhood over lawn decorations and garbage can placement while I enjoyed the satisfaction of watching my electric bills disappear. Occasionally, I'd catch her staring at the solar array while walking her dog, and there was always this strange look on her face. Not curiosity, not admiration, more like resentment. At the time, I couldn't understand why. Eventually, I would. Standing there beside her car at 2 in the morning, I asked the obvious question: "What exactly are you doing?" Denise looked at me like I was interrupting her dinner. "Charging my vehicle. From my charging station." She shrugged. "You weren't using it." I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. "Denise, this is private property. The charger is outside. It's still mine." Well, we're all part of the same community. I remember staring at her for several seconds waiting for the punchline. None came. You can't just walk onto someone's property and plug your car into their electrical system. She folded her arms. "Honestly, Ethan, I don't know why you're being so selfish about sunlight." To this day, that may be the most ridiculous sentence I've ever heard from another adult. The way she said it, you'd think I was personally charging admission to view the sunrise. I unplugged her vehicle and told her to leave. She rolled her eyes dramatically, climbed into her car, and drove away without apologizing. The whole encounter was so absurd that for a few minutes I questioned whether it had actually happened. The next morning, I opened my monitoring software to calculate how much power she'd used. That's when the situation went from ridiculous to infuriating. The charging event from the previous night wasn't the only one in the logs. There were dozens. My stomach sank as I started comparing timestamps. Then I pulled security footage. Night after night, there she was. Sometimes arriving after midnight. Sometimes closer to 3 in the morning. Always looking around first. Always plugging into my charging station. Always leaving before sunrise. The woman hadn't borrowed electricity one time. She had been systematically stealing it for weeks. I spent the rest of the afternoon compiling evidence. Charging records. Camera screenshots. Energy consumption reports. Cost calculations. By evening I had assembled a folder thick enough to make my point impossible to ignore. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't planning revenge. Honestly, I believe this could still be resolved with a simple conversation. So I walked across the street, knocked on Denise's front door, and gave her an opportunity to act like a reasonable adult. What happened after that was the moment everything changed, because instead of showing embarrassment, remorse, or even basic common sense, Denise said something that transformed a neighborhood annoyance into a full-scale war. The moment Denise opened the door, I could already tell the conversation wasn't going to go the way I'd hoped. Some people see a folder full of evidence and immediately start thinking about solutions. Denise looked at it the same way a poker player looks at an opponent's cards. She wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in finding a way around them. I handed her the folder and said, as calmly as I could, "Look, I know you've been using my charging station. I have the logs, the camera footage, everything. I'm not trying to make this a huge issue. Just reimburse a portion of the power you've taken and don't do it again." For a second, she flipped through the pages without saying anything. Then she looked up at me and smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not an embarrassed smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they think they're smarter than everybody else in the room. "You're serious?" she asked. "Completely." She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she tapped one of the energy reports with her finger and said, "You really expect me to pay you for sunlight?" I remember standing there wondering if I had somehow slipped into an alternate universe. "I expect you to pay for electricity generated by equipment I purchased, installed, and maintain." She shook her head. "That's not how community resources work." Community resources. I can still hear those words. She wasn't joking. She genuinely believed she had a right to access something sitting on private property because she had convinced herself it somehow benefited the neighborhood. Before I could respond, she handed the folder back and said, "I think you're being unreasonable, Ethan." Then she shut the door directly in my face. Not slammed it. Not angrily. Somehow the calm way she closed it made it even more insulting. I walked home furious, but more than that, confused. I'd spent most of my career solving technical problems. Technical problems make sense. A wire either carries current or it doesn't. A battery either stores energy or it doesn't. Human beings like Denise operated on a completely different set of laws. For about a week, nothing happened. I considered installing a locking enclosure around the charger and moving on with my life. Looking back, that's probably what a smarter person would have done. Then the violation notice arrived. It was sitting in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon inside an official HOA envelope. At first I thought it was another one of Denise's routine complaints about lawn edging or garbage cans. Then I opened it. The notice accused me of engaging in what it called exclusionary energy practices. I had to read that sentence 3 times. According to the complaint, my refusal to provide neighborhood access to renewable resources was creating an unequal distribution of environmental benefits. I wish I were making that up. It got worse. Denise had somehow convinced 2 other HOA board members to sign off on a recommendation that homeowners should be granted reasonable access to external utility infrastructure located within the community. External utility infrastructure. She was literally describing my private solar system as if it were a public park. I sat at my kitchen table reading the document while laughing so hard I almost spilled coffee on it. Then the laughter stopped, because underneath the ridiculous language was something else. Entitlement. Denise genuinely believed that if she wanted something badly enough, She could simply redefine reality until she got it. That realization changed everything. Up until then, I had been treating this as a misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was deliberate. She knew exactly what she was doing. Over the next several days, I started documenting everything. Every interaction, every email, every camera recording, every power draw. The engineer in me couldn't help it. Documentation is what engineers do. We gather data. We identify patterns. We solve problems. And the pattern becoming clear was that Denise wasn't going to stop. If anything, she seemed encouraged. A few days later, I caught her standing near my charging station again while pretending to walk her dog. Another evening, she slowed her car almost to a stop while passing my driveway. The woman was studying the system like a burglar planning a second visit. That's when an idea started forming. Not an illegal idea. Not a dangerous idea. Just a lesson. The kind of lesson that sticks with someone longer than a conversation. Now, before anybody jumps to conclusions, let me explain something. Electrical engineering isn't about making things explode. It's about controlling behavior. Every circuit is basically a conversation. Inputs create outputs. Actions create consequences. Denise had spent months ignoring boundaries because she'd never experienced consequences. I started sketching designs after dinner one evening, then refining them, then running simulations. By Friday, I had a plan. The charging station visible from the street would no longer be connected to my primary charging system. Instead, I installed a decoy setup designed to look completely identical to the original. Same housing, same cable, same indicator lights, same appearance from every angle. The difference existed entirely inside the enclosure. The moment someone attempted unauthorized access, a relay system would activate and trigger a protective response designed to immediately interrupt charging while generating enough electrical noise to force any connected equipment into shutdown mode. Perfectly legal, completely safe, zero risk of injury, but extremely unpleasant for anyone trying to steal power. The most important detail wasn't the hardware. It was the sign. I mounted a bright yellow warning sign directly above the port. Private power system. Authorized use only. Do not connect vehicles without owner permission. The sign was impossible to miss. Which was exactly the point. If Denise left the charger alone after that, the problem was solved. If she ignored it, every consequence would be entirely her own decision. Then I waited. Saturday evening arrived. Around 10 o'clock, I settled into my workshop with a cup of coffee and opened the security camera feeds on one monitor. Midnight came and went. Nothing happened. Around 1 in the morning, I started thinking maybe she'd finally gotten the message. Then at 1:17 a.m., motion detection triggered. I leaned forward. There she was. Denise stepped into frame wearing pajama pants, sneakers, and a hooded sweatshirt. She glanced around the neighborhood, looked directly at the warning sign, paused for about 2 seconds, and then walked straight toward the charging port anyway. I remember shaking my head and laughing. It wasn't even anger anymore. It felt like watching somebody voluntarily walk into a glass door. She connected the charging cable. The system recognized the connection. 10 seconds passed. 15. 20. Then everything happened at once. A loud crack echoed through the quiet street. Not an explosion. More like the sharp report of a heavy electrical disconnect engaging under load. The charger immediately shut down. The vehicle's charging system dropped offline. Error messages flashed across the car's display. A burst of sparks snapped from the connector as protective systems isolated the circuit. Denise screamed. I mean, genuinely screamed. She stumbled backward, lost her footing, and landed flat on the grass beside her driveway. Meanwhile, the car sat there completely inactive, refusing to continue charging. The entire sequence lasted maybe 3 seconds. 3 beautiful, glorious seconds captured in crystal clear, high-definition video from 4 different camera angles. I sat in my workshop staring at the monitor, speechless. Not because the system worked. I knew it would work. I was speechless because Denise had actually ignored a giant warning sign and plugged into the charger anyway. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd still believed common sense might save her. It didn't. The next morning, I woke up to someone pounding on my front door hard enough to rattle the windows. I already knew who it was. What I didn't know was that Denise hadn't come alone. And standing behind her were 2 HOA board members who were about to discover a version of the story Denise had conveniently forgotten to tell. When I opened the front door, Denise looked like she hadn't slept all night. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. Her face was red with anger, and she was pointing toward the street before she even said hello. Behind her stood Leonard Briggs, one of the HOA board members, and Sandra Kim, who mostly joined meetings so she could make sure Denise didn't accidentally start a civil war over lawn decorations. Parked across the street sat Denise's Lucid, looking perfectly normal except for the charging cable hanging uselessly from the port. "You sabotaged my vehicle," Denise snapped. "You tampered with private property." I looked past her toward Leonard and Sandra. Both of them seemed uncomfortable, like they'd been dragged into an argument halfway through and weren't entirely sure who was telling the truth. "Good morning to you too," I said. Denise took a step forward. "Don't play games. Whatever you did last night damaged my charging system." "Interesting," I replied, "because according to my cameras, somebody trespassed onto private property and connected to equipment that was clearly marked as unauthorized for public use." For the first time, Denise hesitated. Just a tiny pause. But it was enough. Leonard looked at her, then at me, then back at her. "Wait," he said carefully. "You were on Ethan's property last night." Denise immediately changed tactics. "That's not the issue." Which, in my experience, is exactly what people say when it is absolutely the issue. I asked everyone to come inside. A few minutes later we were sitting around my dining table. I disappeared into my office and returned carrying a thick binder I'd spent weeks assembling. Every charging log, every power report, every camera screenshot, every date, every timestamp, every single unauthorized connection. Denise's confidence began fading the moment she saw how organized everything was. Engineers have a reputation for being obsessive, and honestly, sometimes we earn it. I opened the binder and started turning pages. Here's May 7th. Here's May 9th. Here's May 11th. Here's May 14th. With each page, another photo appeared showing Denise plugging into my system in the middle of the night. Leonard's eyebrows kept climbing higher. Sandra eventually stopped looking at me and started staring directly at Denise. "How many times did this happen?" she asked quietly. 23 documented incidents," I replied. The room went silent. Denise opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "The charger was accessible. So is my mailbox," I said. "That doesn't mean you can take what's inside it." Sandra actually laughed. She tried to hide it, but she laughed. That was the moment I knew the tide had turned. Denise launched into a long explanation about community resources, sustainability, neighborhood cooperation, and several other phrases that sounded impressive until you thought about them for more than 5 seconds. The problem was that facts don't care about confidence. And every fact in that binder pointed in exactly one direction. Leonard finally leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Denise, did you really file an HOA complaint because Ethan wouldn't let you use his private electrical system?" The silence that followed was incredible. Denise looked trapped. Not because she had been caught stealing electricity. Not because her car had stopped charging. She looked trapped because for the first time, she was standing in front of people who weren't automatically accepting her version of reality. Eventually she muttered, "I believed it benefited the community." Leonard rubbed his forehead. Sandra stared out the window. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The conversation lasted another hour. By the end of it, the HOA complaint was officially withdrawn. Denise was instructed to reimburse me for the documented power usage. She was also informed that future incidents would result in police involvement rather than neighborhood mediation. The look on her face when she realized nobody was coming to rescue her from the consequences of her own decisions was worth every minute of frustration I'd endured. Over the following weeks, word spread through the neighborhood. Not because I told anyone. Neighborhoods like ours run on gossip the same way cars run on fuel. People heard pieces of the story, then more pieces. Eventually, everyone knew. Denise's reputation took a hit she never fully recovered from. Residents who had spent years quietly tolerating her behavior suddenly started questioning everything. HOA meetings became a lot more balanced. Funny how that works. As for me, I upgraded the charging station, installed additional access controls, and moved on with my life. The solar system kept doing exactly what it had always done, producing clean energy and quietly powering my home. Every now and then I'd see Denise while checking the mail. We were always polite, always civil, but there was a distance there that never disappeared. Maybe that's for the best. Looking back, the strangest part isn't that someone tried to steal electricity. It's that she convinced herself she was morally justified while doing it. Somewhere along the way, Denise stopped seeing other people's property as something deserving respect and started viewing it as something available whenever she wanted it. And honestly, that's what created the entire mess. Not greed, not money, entitlement. That's why I'm curious what you think. If you discovered a neighbor had been secretly using something you spent years building, would you have handled it differently? Was Denise simply misguided, or did she know exactly what she was doing from the beginning? Let me know in the comments, because even now, years later, people who hear this story still argue about where the line should have been drawn. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA power trip, an entitled neighbor, or a situation where someone thought the rules somehow didn't apply to them, share your story too. I'd love to hear it. And if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for the next story, because trust me, some neighbors make Denise look reasonable.